Welcome, everyone. I'm Jaciel Kunz, a professor in tourism department at the Federal University of Paraná, Brazil. And join me, Renata Xabregas, a PhD candidate in tourism at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. Together, we are part of MobTur, a research group based at the University of São Paulo and led by Professor Tiago Alves, dedicated to exploring the intersection between mobilities and tourism in global contexts. Today, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Ilze Mertena, Senior Lecturer and Programming Leader for the BA International Tourism Management at Manchester Metropolitan University, UK. With a PhD focus on the embodied experience and train tourism, Dr. Mertena bridges theory and practice to explore how travel shapes the connection between destinations, mobility, and sustainability. Her high-impact publications emphasize the role of social practice theories in redefining railway tourism, alongside innovative strategies for integrating trains into rural tourism systems. A pioneer in studies on multimodal mobility bundles, she also investigates how tourist competencies and governance dynamics influence sustainable transport. So let's dive into this fascinating topic with her. Welcome, Ilze. Your article integrates practice theories with mobilities research. Could you explain in simple terms for us how this framework helps us understand train tourism beyond traditional transport studies?
First of all, thank you so much, Jaciel, for inviting me to this program of yours. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for such a warm welcome and introduction. And yes, let's begin with the questions. This is your first question is just such a wonderful question that allows me to really talk and introduce practice theories and the lens that practice theories offers, and how it really gives a better understanding of train tourism and going beyond traditional transport studies. But before I speak about practice theories, I thought I'd give a little bit of background of what are traditional transport studies and also transport geography. What are these studies dealing with? So historically, the focus is on technical, engineering, and economic aspects of transport. So that's what the transport studies specifically are doing. So if we think about technical perspectives, this is about physical infrastructures, the technology that supports transportation systems, thinking about efficiency, safety, and so on. When we talk about engineering, there again, the focus shifts to the design, construction, and maintenance of transport infrastructures, traffic flow, importance of efficiencies and safety. Yeah, and then we come to economic, and their economic studies are concerned with the financial and economic aspects of transportation, economic impact of transport investments, the role of transport in regional development, and so on. If we think about UK, transport studies and transport geography focus mainly on train services, timetabling, privatization, economic development, patterns of movement. And so what we can see with the transport studies and transport geography is this focus on structural side of transport. So in response to this purely structural side, we can see studies in mobility studies and studies on slow travel and tourism. So here, the focus shifts to scrutinizing the human aspects of movement, looking into the choices and experiences of individual travelers, considering their personal motivations, behaviors, social identities, also cultural meanings that we attach to travel. So there is a lot of literature on analyzing a traveler's time use. If we think about mobilities, time used during leisure travels, time used during commuting. Then there is also this, when we think about human aspects, we think about tourists' segmentation, profiling, and also the experience of heritage railways. So mobility studies and slow travel have this real focus on the agency. Sometimes we call it actor side of transport, looking at the human side. So what we can see that there is then becomes this divide. Some disciplines would look at the structure and some focus on the actors, all right? And creating this divide, what we argue, is not really helpful, especially if we want to integrate mobilities and transport research into tourism, if we want to develop a more nuanced understanding of their role in social life. And also if we want to, at some point, steer human mobility towards more sustainable practices. So this leads to the need, what Scheller and Urey have already voiced almost 20 years ago, okay? And namely, that there is need to see a paradigm shift so we can understand the complexity that drives transportation shifts, okay? And practice theory is one lens, one kind of framework that allows us to bridge this structure and agency divide. Because practice theorists have a different way of thinking about transport and tourism mobilities. So instead of just focusing on individual choices, behaviors, experiences, on one hand, or the bigger systems and efficiencies that support transport, we in practice theory investigate transport use, and in my case, I looked at train travel as a social practice. Okay, so the social practice itself becomes the main focus of investigation. Okay, does that hopefully that makes sense so far?
Completely.
Yes. So we, rather than looking at what people are necessarily doing or how the technologies are enabling the practice, we shift. There is this shift, and we look at social material environments like infrastructure, like technology, cultural norms, all of those contexts as a very important and essential part of social life that actually is not something, not like an add-on, but it actually co-constitutes human behavior. Okay, so and in this way, practice theory helps overcome this actor structure divide, where human actors are seen as either entirely driven by personal choices or completely shaped by structures like institutions or systems. But that is one side of practice theory, kind of looking at this bigger picture. The other important aspect is that it allows to see sometimes invisible interconnections between different practices and different activities during our everyday social life or on our holidays and leisure trips. And in that sense, what happens is that traveling to a destination becomes interconnected with activities at the destination. Okay, so we see it as a bundle of interconnected activities. And of course, transport is one of those activities. So we plan our day out differently depending on the transport type we are using. And that's what my research shows. Yeah, if we travel by car, we might not care how much luggage we are taking. We might go to more places than we would be able to do with a train, because train involves scheduling, train involves waiting for train, maybe delays and cancellations. So we plan our trips differently depending on what transport mode we use. And so it even shows how transport becomes an important part of our trips, our holidays. So these practices of transport, they don't exist in a vacuum. They are deeply embedded in broader systematic elements. Yeah, and that's that bringing back these socio-material environments, yeah, including infrastructure, technologies, and socio-cultural factors. Yeah. And so we have these contexts that co-constitute our behavior, and then our behavior is also guided by different activities that we undertake during a trip. And all of this in practice theory forms what Watson calls these systems of practices. And these are these overlapping networks of practices that shape our social life. And of course, tourism is one of the elements of social life. An interesting and of course obvious recognition when we think about tourism through the lens of practice theories is that practices don't exist unless they are carried out by practitioners through repeated meaningful activities. Okay? And that is really helpful to think if we think about how practices occur, how they recruit practitioners, how practitioners develop communities of practice. And then in some situations, for some practices, the practices are abandoned. Okay? And it really kind of, the practice theory allows a zoom into that process. So to summarize, I know it's probably been a very long answer to this question, but to summarize, focusing on practices and the broader systems that shape and sustain these different practices can help us better understand how mobility happens, what the underlying structures and dynamics of a given practice is, why certain transport modes gain or lose popularity, and how practices change over time. It also helps us to see how transport mobilities connect with other tourism practices, like socializing, working, shopping, and different leisure activities and tourism travels. Yeah? And this is crucial because it shows the demand for transport. And it shows the demand for transport as being co-evolved with other practices. Yeah, for example, in the UK, if we look from the practice theory perspective, it kind of explains why, for example, the dominating system of mobility is cars. So in rural areas, cars, 90% of all travel happen by car. In cities, it's about 60%. In comparison, train it only takes about 2%. And most of these trips, two-thirds of the trips, is out or in London. Okay? So you need to consider not just kind of motivations, choices that people make, but also these physical infrastructures that support this transport mode, that really interlock transport mode into our everyday lives. That's, I don't know, probably I can't say that that's in brief, but that's how I see the response to this question.
Okay, so let's go to the second question, that it's about your field work. Okay, your ethnograph field work focused on rural branch lines in northern England. So what made these routes ideal for studying the interplay between tourism, mobility, and everyday practice?
Thank you for this question. So in my case, it wasn't about finding the ideal route, so to highlight this interplay between tourism, mobilities, and everyday practices. I kind of see that the connections are always there in tourism. It was more a mix of pragmatic and personal reasons, also including my personal interest in countryside hiking, exploring. But if we look at these at the route, or it was 3 branch lines that I selected. The Settle-Carlisle line is a great example of train tourism in the UK. It runs through some of the most beautiful and historically rich landscapes in the country. It combines scenic beauty with rich industrial heritage, and it attracts both locals and domestic tourists. It travels through very diverse landscape, and I think that is a very big strength of this route. It actually takes 10 hours to go the whole route, to travel the whole route. And so what helps is that the route starts with some remote rural regions of a region that is called Yorkshire Dales. And then it goes on to breathtaking seascape of Cumbria's coastline. And then from that Cumbria's coastline, that also includes seaside resorts as well, then it moves into the mountains and hills of Lake District. And this is the largest national park in England and Wales. So it's very, very diverse, very beautiful. It features 14 tunnels, 20 viaducts, bridges, beautifully maintained Victorian-style railway stations. So that is the mobile landscape that we see, and that becomes an activity in itself. A sightseeing point in itself. But then, of course, when you leave the train, there is access to various hiking trails, cycling routes, bird watching, and other leisure activities. So this really allowed me to actually become aware of this multimodal nature of train travel. Okay? What makes also the line interesting is the way it's been preserved and promoted through successful partnerships, which is a good evidence of effective governance as well. Yeah, that's in brief.
Thank you.
Very interesting case study, of course, very interesting field work. The next question is, one of your papers mentioned how older versus newer train carriages affect passenger behavior. How do these material differences shape the affective atmospheres on board, especially for leisure versus commuter travels?
Yeah, that's a very important point, and actually doing more research currently on this. So, if we think about train materialities, this is one of the key elements. Key elements. One of the two. Sorry, you did. Jaciel, you asked about the tourism, the atmospheres, isn't it, Pat? Yes. I don't know why I suddenly. Yes. So one of the two key elements, the materialities. So the materialities of older carriages and newer carriages was one of the two key elements that affects the atmospheres on board. Or we can also say how the carriage feels and what it allows us as travelers to do. The other element that affects the atmospheres is the train sociality. Okay, so if we think about the newer and older carriages, which represent the materiality, it was very interesting to observe during the interviews that I did on trains, how all the carriages that were so much louder, that these were the carriages where the windows, you could still open the windows. These were the carriages where you could very much hear the different noises of going into different turns, and the train itself, because it is a diesel train. And that really impacted how people could socialize. The interesting point is that I did my research during summertime, so I spent the whole summer on trains, and it was a very hot summer. And so it was, we as passengers, we needed the windows to be open because there was no air conditioning on these old diesel trains. And so when I listened back to the interviews, I could sometimes not even hear my participants, because the noises of the technology of the diesel trains, the wind, the squeaks and turns of the train were just so loud. And so that's from my observations. But even the participants during the interviews, they would say that the older carriages are not as comfortable, are not as kind of relaxing, and doesn't kind of afford these social interactions. In comparison, the newer trains, they are much more quieter. They are much more isolated from the outside environment. You can't open the windows. There is air conditioning inside. So by many travelers, they were favored because they created these neutral atmospheres that could be filled with different activities like socializing or else. Okay? So that's about this materiality and how it influences train atmospheres on trains. And then it comes to this social and commuting hours, the leisure and commuting hours. And that again was this social aspect of influencing the atmospheres. And basically many leisure travelers would say that commuters, they just care about quickly getting to work. They are just really thinking about work. They are not interested in socializing. The commuting trains are so much more packed. They are so much more crowded. So there was this very big difference between the hours of leisure, where everyone feels relaxed. Nobody, or the tourists that I recognize and I approached, they were all happy to talk to me, in comparison to commuting hours, where it was even hard to move through these trains, and where I would usually carry out some observations rather than interviews, because it was just so focused on getting to the end point task of getting to work.
Okay, so you argue that tourists need specific skills to engage confidently with train travel. What are some surprising competencies travelers develop, and how do they transform the journey into part of the tourism experience?
Yes, and that question kind of bridges the two papers that I have written. So one is on tourist skills in Annals of Tourism Research, and the other one is in Mobilities on understanding the train tourism. And basically, what we argue is that having skills, we can also call them practical know-hows, is an important precondition to engage actually in any tourist practice, and engage very importantly with confidence, ease, and enjoyment. So the skills really enable us to enjoy the trip, the leisure time. Yeah. But what is interesting, that when you talk to experienced travelers, knowledgeable travelers, they don't really recognize that any skills are needed. Yeah? So you only see this need for skills and practical know-hows when you look from the novice's perspective. People who are new to train travel, who may feel uncertain and tense engaging with this practice, and they require constant double checking and kind of reassurance that they are on the right route, that they have got on the right train, that they have selected the right platform, and things like that. So there is this difference depending on who you talk to. Because for the skilled travelers, they see that, I remember speaking to one very skilled traveler, and they said, "Oh, what skills? We don't need any skills. I'm not driving this train," right? I'm not on the front, and I'm not. Yeah. So they even see it more like a joke. Yeah. But of course, if you look from this development of how you start traveling and then develop into a knowledgeable practitioner, then we can identify quite a few interesting things that are surprising, especially when you start this practice. And some of them, how you pack for the day. So packing your luggage, packing how much stuff you take with you, because whatever you take, you need to carry on your bag most of your time. Yeah? And if you forget to take some warmer clothes, and if it's raining and it's windy, then it's not that enjoyable. But if you take too much, then it's very heavy to carry on the whole day. Then there is this skillful gazing. And these could be like on which side of the train you need to sit to kind of have the best views of all the attractions that are coming along the route. And sometimes even myself, when I started to go on these trips, I thought, oh, why did I not sit on that side? Because, you see the hills better from that side. And then it happened that actually all the seats on that side were already taken. So you think, okay, next time, when we go here, I need to actually take that seat. Flexibility with trains. I think this is something that I already mentioned at the start. Depending on the transport mode that you take for your day trip or a longer travel journey, you can kind of plan how many activities you can include in a day. You need to be realistic. I remember one time where I planned to visit an attraction, and the closing time was quite early. It was about 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And so on my way, so I left the hotel, and there was a bus ride to the train, a little bit of walking. Then we discovered that the train has been delayed. One actually train was cancelled. Then the length of the trip. So actually, one thing that it was, I should have selected some other attraction that is actually closer to the place where we stayed. So the length of the trip, with all the cancellations and delays, resulted that we arrived about 40 minutes before the attraction closed. So that was something new to me, because, with a car, you just get on the car, 20 minutes drive maybe, and you are there. And then after a few hours, you can select and go to another place. So being realistic in planning. But another very important kind of and surprising thing is, and this is what I more learned from my participants, is using the trains when traveling with bikes. And that was very interesting, because different train companies have different rules in terms of bikes. So, for example, Northern Train that I used that travels along this route only allows two bikes per train. But then over time, the travelers learn how, most of the time the conductors are not very strict. So you can kind of, that you can be the third bike, and they won't mind unless the train is very crowded, right? Or the other thing is that they are high steps. So, and you need to learn how to actually, need to have the strength to lift that bike and to get into that train. And so I could see more like a community feeling, where younger and more experienced train users and who had also bikes helped. One time helped an elderly lady to get on the train and kind of explain, that it will be fine that you are the third bike, and kind of reassured her. So these are kind of, I think, more surprising things, but when you just start the practice.
Okay. Jaciel, I think the question is yours. The next question.
My turn. Your research, Ilze, highlights competition between train travel and car dependency, as you mentioned earlier. What systematic barriers make it hard for rural train tourism to recruit loyal practitioners, as you phrase it?
Yeah, right. Yes, that's a very interesting question. Thank you. Yeah. So I think I think there are several of these barriers, and I think what it would be useful, maybe a little bit referring to history. So of course, currently the car is the dominant system of travel. At least it is in the UK. And many European countries. And it really guides the ways we socialize, organize family life, shopping, commuting, leisure, and many tourism activities. Yeah? So there is this invisible, sometimes, interlocking of activities. Okay, so if I think about myself, actually, I love traveling by train. I would love to be more sustainable in my practices. I recognize the carbon footprint that cars create and so on. But the thing is that how my social life is organized, my work actually is very easily accessible by tram. But then my youngest daughter goes to a school, and the school is completely off the grid for trams, and not even talking about trains. So I would need to take 2 buses from my work to get to the school, and that might take about 2 hours, whereas by car it's just about 40 minutes. Then if we think about shopping, all the big shopping centers, and I mean here the grocery shops, are outside of the city center, and there is also developed this routine and habit of shopping for a week. So again, this habit and this way of running your everyday life is kind of interlocked into that car use. Okay, but of course, that was very different. Let's say if we go back 19th century, mid 20th century, at that time, the train was a dominating system of mobility. So this was the first form of mass transport for tourism, and train was the one that connected trains with the countryside. And railways enabled a remarkable growth of spas and seaside resorts in England. But what happened is that all the seaside resorts, all the spas, they were built at the end of the railway route, so accessible by railways. And that's how the leisure industry at that time, and also our lifestyles, they were guided by this railway network. Okay? So what happened, of course, in 1970s, and this kind of shows this how rooted this challenge is of change. Yeah, because in 1970s, trains started to lose importance. Okay? And of course, because it gave way to cars and airplanes. I think that also is a time when our lifestyles became so much faster, isn't it? We had to quickly get somewhere. We wanted to travel further. We wanted to experience exotic. Okay? So on the ground, what we could see is that automobility started to quite literally drive out competitors such as, bikes, buses, trains, even walking. Yeah. And not only, of course, it was driving out this competition, but it also changed these daily routines, our habits. Instead of buying a little bit of groceries every day, we started going to these big malls and grocery supermarkets once a week, because cars enabled that. But it's not only the everyday life, also new places, attractions, and hotels opened that were only accessible by cars in some instances. And of course, the new infrastructure developed, and that was, of course, a big investment of money, because as we know, this idea of cars being dominated in the car industry was also supported by the UK government and European governments, if we just look at UK and Europe. So it all created these car parks and road networks. Yeah, and that is one of the, I think, the biggest, or one of the biggest barriers now to move back to trains, because how rooted these practices are in our everyday life. The other, of course, aspect, so it's not just the infrastructure and technologies. There are also these meanings that we attach to different practices, and car travel versus train travel. Socio-cultural values as well. What we value, what is normal, what is acceptable. What are our expectations? How long should it take to get to a destination? Yeah. So that all leads to these fast rhythms of our lives, and that cars offer this flexibility, comfort, but also status. Right? So very often we don't want to mingle with other people. We want to be, in our individual car. Deciding when and for how long we go somewhere, when we leave and when we arrive, and so this also leads to what are the perceptions of what is normal to do, and how to travel to countryside. So it is normal to arrive to countryside by a car and to pick different attractions and places that are not accessible by train. So we don't think through the lens of a train network. We are more likely to think through the lens of a car network and road network. And I think these two elements, the habits and routines of our everyday life that are interlinked with cars, and our norms, values, and expectations are, I think, that the two big kind of barriers to more train travel and train tourism.
Okay, so about this subject, competition, let's talk about Brazil. The railway structure for passengers is obsolete, with many lines and stations preserved as nostalgic tourist tours. Road transport dominates both freight and intercity travel. How could your proposal to reduce car-centric tourism and promote trains as the main access to rural areas relate to contexts like Brazil, where railways lost daily transport use?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Thank you. And I think I want to be upfront that the solutions that might work in the UK and maybe Europe can't be just transferred to other locations like Brazil. And mainly because, like I said at the beginning, when we think about train travel as a practice, an important element of this practice is the socio-cultural and material contexts of the practice, because they really co-constitute what we do and how we do things. So here we need to recognize that practices in different places will have their own kind of time of growth, popularity, change, and there will be different reasons for the practices to decline and be abandoned. Because of this context sensitivity. So I think that what my research can do is to show that the thinking through the lens of practice theory and through the lens of, investigating practices rather than just practitioners, focusing on practitioners or focusing on infrastructures and other, technologies. So focusing on practices is a useful way of seeing things differently. Kind of, I think, more thinking out of the box and trying to find new ways of revitalizing railway that would work for the Brazilian context. Or that might be even challenging, but at least the starting point would be to understand what actually caused the situation that you are currently in, and understand it, like I said, from this practice theory's perspective.
Okay.
Great analysis, Ilze. Now on slow tourism. Slow tourism emphasizes the journey itself. How does train travel redefine tourists' perceptions of time, and why is this critical for sustainable mobility?
Yeah, very important question. And there is, and one thing that has been researched in mobilities studies and slow tourism studies is this different approach to time. And we know that slow travel emphasizes the journey as a valuable part of the overall travel experience. And in that sense, what the slow travel shows is that, is that there is this different view on time and how we need to take things slower. We need to abandon this expectation that we just quickly get to a destination, and that's where the activities or the joy or the leisure starts. So in slow travel, the time that we spend during getting to a destination becomes as important as the time that we spend at the destination. And it becomes part of the experience that requires attention, and that allows us to learn how to enjoy the whole experience of that starts from leaving your home and then getting back. I think it also helps us to reevaluate what does it mean to spend more quality time in one place, and that it is okay not to rush, okay not to see too many places in one trip, or to spend much longer time at a destination. And again, referring to this multimodality of tourism, to take train, to take bus, to walk, of course, that will take much more longer time, but that becomes part of that experience, rather than just, choosing the quickest possible way of getting, let's say, flying, and then focusing only on the time at the destination. So the joy is in experiencing the whole trip, including transport and the time spent on traveling, rather than, kind of canceling out that transport as quick as possible, and then just enjoying the destination. And of course, if we are selecting or choosing to select more slower transport modes, we know that it has a very positive impact from the sustainability perspective, because cars and airplanes is the most carbon intense activities.
Okay. About the pandemic. The pandemic shifted travel patterns. Did your fieldwork reveal any post-COVID transformations in how tourists perceive or use trains for leisure?
Yeah, well, another great question. I have to say that I think luckily for me, I finished my data collection, my travels, right before COVID. So, because I think that would, I guess, kind of stop my research for a while. But we have seen big changes in train use in the UK during COVID and after COVID especially. And that is, again, if we look from the practice theory perspective, there is no surprise, because we know how transport is interconnected with other daily activities, other practices, right? So once after COVID and already during COVID, we moved to more working from home.
Mm-hmm.
That resulted, of course, in less use of trains and other modes of transport. So that led automatically to less monthly or yearly commuter tickets to be purchased. And that, of course, has a big impact on the key market that the train in the UK, the train system in the UK has, which is the commuters. Before COVID, the main area of focus was the economic side of how trains contribute to local, national economy, how they facilitate commuting. So when any rail works were planned, they were always planned during weekends and school holidays and other free time out of work, which really impacted the leisure use of trains, because this was the time when we could see more delays, more cancellations, and so on. So it was very annoying for train tourists. Whereas now what we can see is actually the use for leisure, the use for tourism has grown and almost is back to the pre-COVID back to the pre-COVID levels, whereas the commuting, of course, is not catching up. And so that just shows how some restructuring in train in train provision in train industry is on the way, is required.
This is great. Now, looking ahead, what innovations or trends like digital tours or community partnerships excite you most about the future of train tourism and the UK and beyond?
Okay, right. Yeah. So what excites me most? I mean, innovations like digital and more simplified ticketing. You might be surprised, but the tiers of the tickets that we have currently, so many travelers are saying that it's really hard to get their heads around what kind of ticket they need to buy. Right. So simplifying these things, and this is happening kind of right now as we speak. Many train companies are doing that. Is a great thing. Real-time journey planning apps. This is an absolute great thing, especially for people who are new to train travel, who want to engage more with more sustainable use of transport on holidays. Is absolutely great, especially those apps that integrate different transport modes and mobilities. Okay, so that's great. Of course, the partnerships, especially the ones that are between trains, trams, and bus operators, because then it kind of provides these links between different networks, yeah, and makes the travel, of course, more seamless. And that's what we see in certain regions and places, but not in others. So it's kind of fragmented. The way how that's been done, and how, let's say, day tickets can be used by different transport modes, or even some monthly tickets. Yeah, so these tools can enhance convenience, promote lesser known routes, and support sustainable travel choices. The other thing that I want to highlight, and that kind of links back to this fragmentation in the railway industry, there are so many train operators in the UK currently, and some of them are so much better at strategically planning their operations, operating their trains, and thinking about different events, and how actually train supports different practices and lifestyles. And there are other train operators who are let's say, not as good as that. Yeah, so what we currently see, so this is kind of the latest thing in the UK, is the government is bringing most passenger train operators under public ownership now, and this is kind of happening now. So this nationalization will start this year, 2025, and is kind of now the planning now is that it is expected to finish in around 2027. Yeah, so that's kind of a big structural change, big change of how the train infrastructure and the trains will be run in the UK. And kind of also highlighting this importance of governance, and that it is not it is important, what is the practice, and also who is it governed by, and how partnerships are developed, or all these aspects.
Okay, and how did you balance your personal subjectivity as tourists yourselves with academic analysis?
Yeah, that is kind of always an important question when we think about methodology, isn't it? So in the decision that I made is, of course, if we think about subjectivity, personal subjectivity is always there. Okay, I think if we the claims that we are trying to be objectives, of course we are trying, and we are doing everything that we can, and there were tools and approaches that I used for my research, but the personal subjectivity has to be recognized. In my situation, the main way was to engage, to listen, to observe, to interview other practitioners, other train tourists. So I always try to balance and try to compare and try to make sense, comparing my observations, my personal experiences as being one of those train tourists, and then compare and make sense in combination with the interviews that I did with my practitioners. So I think I remember it was over 80 interviews with people on trains, with tourists on trains. And I tried to make these interviews, and what I think really made these insights more meaningful, sort of more ethnographic, sensory interviews, where I not just paid attention to what people say, but how they say it. What is their facial expression when they say it? There were times when people decided, well, they need to talk into a hushed voices and things like that. So I really hope that by combining these different methods that focus more on myself, observations of others, and interviewing and listening and speaking formally and informally with others, and have really allowed to highlight different dimensions of my research and of that practice.
Well, last but not least, what gaps remain in studying tourism mobilities? What topics would you suggest for future research, particularly in the global south?
Yeah, and I think that's a very important question. And I think it's very, very important to recognize that most research, or a lot of research, has been done in global north, including my research. And so, and that's the reason why I don't think I can make claims, okay, what is happening in global south? And we need to understand more, and we need to hear more these voices from global south. What is the situation? How the contexts, how the socio-cultural environments influence different practices in global north. I think it's still unexplored area is the tourism mobilities, looking at tourism different tourism practices, tourism bundles from the practice theory perspective. I think the other important area that is still relatively unexplored is the role of governments in promoting sustainable travel. I think there is too much focus on individual decisions, and that we need to start from ourselves. And of course, each individual traveler needs to be accountable of what they are doing and the choices and the behaviors that they are making. But we also need to recognize that we are interlocked in those dominant systems of mobility, and that governance is one way to help to change the practice. A very interesting study was done on, maybe that's kind of going a little bit off the track, by Shav, where they looked at how smoking, let's say in Europe, how smoking in public spaces was really changed, was prohibited through the rules, and that really changed the practice, like overnight almost. Okay? And it changed how businesses organize their activities and arrange the nights out and these things. So and the area that I'm currently working on, where I think there's quite a lot of research done on affective atmospheres, in different places, destinations, squares, and other locations. But there is not that much, but it hasn't been kind of connected with the mobile spaces. So I'm currently looking at the atmospheres within mobile spaces, specifically on trains and on boats, and how that influences, again, the practice of tourists.
As concluding remarks, would you like to add something else for us to finish this incredible interview?
Well, I think you managed quite successfully to cover very diverse areas of my research. So I don't think I want to add something, because that was great questions, and thank you.
Excellent, then. Thank you so much, Ilze, for your valuable contribution to our MobTur videocast series. It was very nice hearing your point of view and learning from you. No doubt your theoretical and practical inputs deserve to be more and more recognized, and we hope to contribute to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you again.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us, and we hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.